our immigrant communities
For little folks.
for their votes. Yeah. And to me, it's actually not even a winning strategy, let alone how morally reprehensible it is. Because what Donald Trump and the Republicans are doing is trying to steal money from the poor and give it to the rich. That's what the big beautiful bill was. They gave tax cuts to the rich, and they paid for those tax cuts by cutting funding to Medicaid and funding to SNAP. Like hundreds of billions of dollars they cut to those programs that provide us with healthcare and food. And they're distracting people from what they're doing to steal from us by blaming our struggles on immigrant communities. That's why they're spending so much time demonizing immigrants. It's because they don't want people to understand the reality of what they're doing, which is trying to screw over the majority of people in this country and continue to put more wealth in the pockets of the billionaires. So if the Democrats had any principles or any backbone, they would just explain to people, this is what's going on. And the problem is not your immigrant neighbor, who you've probably known for years and who you know is working just as hard as you to provide for your family. The problem is these billionaires who are trying to steal from you and are stealing from you every single day. But the reason that the Democrats are scared to do that is because they are also funded and controlled by billionaires. And so instead of addressing the root of the problem, which they don't want to do, they're starting to move in lockstep with the Republicans are saying. And so to me, I understand why people feel afraid. I think that we can build a powerful movement because a lot of people are opposed to the terrorizing of our immigrant communities. And I think one of the most important things is to break from these politicians who are using our communities as political bargaining chips instead of actually seeing the humanity in every single person and trying to build unity between our people across these lines of division. Because again, whether you're an immigrant or not, you gotta eat, you wanna provide for your family, you need healthcare. All of us can unite on that. And what's the barrier to us getting that? It's not immigrants, it's the fact that 900 billionaires own as much wealth as the 170 million poorest of us.
That's facts. How do you feel like running up as Senate, especially in the socialist social group status? Because you know a lot of people only talk about Republican or Democrat. How do you feel like running up? Do you feel a little bit anxious? Because you know a lot of people don't know about the socialist groups. And how do you feel like going in?
Yeah, it's a good question. I've definitely, over the time that I've been a socialist, which is almost 10 years now, I definitely felt some of that anxiety because growing up in this society, basically from day one, you get taught that socialism and communism are like the most evil things in the world. And I remember, for example, I used to like watch the George Lopez show on Nickelodeon growing up, and George, his wife Angie, was Cuban, and her dad, literally almost every single episode, would come in and say something bad about Cuba and socialism. So I'm watching this on Nickelodeon every night. I don't even know what socialism is, but I'm being trained to believe that it's bad. And that's just one example of how that happens in our culture all the time. I remember a more recent example was like Stranger Things. I forget the girl's character, but she's like one of the kids' little sister, and she's talking about how capitalism is the best thing ever created and socialism is bad. And millions of people are watching this on Netflix.
Yeah.
And so they're literally, whether it's in school or in popular culture or in the news, they're training people to believe that socialism is an evil and scary thing. And so for me then, as I started to become a socialist and I saw the culture that existed in our society more broadly, there's a level of kind of fear to tell people about what you believe because people are trained to react so negatively to it. But I think that's really changing. And there is still some of that propaganda and misinformation that we have to work through. But I think if we're scared to talk to people about what socialism is and how it could solve the problems in our society, we're really missing an opportunity because more and more people understand that something needs to change. More and more people don't trust the federal government. They don't trust the White House. They don't trust Congress. They don't trust the Supreme Court. People are struggling to meet their needs financially. And so everybody knows that there's a problem, but every problem needs a solution. And so we can't just say society is messed up. We need to have a positive vision, a positive program. And to me, that's socialism, which basically means that power is in the hands of everyday people, in the hands of working people, and we use society's resources to plan the economy to meet our needs and to protect our planet. It's a very basic definition, and I'm excited to be able to spread that message through this campaign, even knowing that we might have to help people work through some of the propaganda they've been told their whole lives, just like I had to work through it myself.
Where is some kind of propaganda that you think society right now is currently going through?
Well, about socialism specifically, one of the things that you get told a lot is if you're a socialist, or if we live under socialism, you're gonna have all of your property taken away.
Yeah.
Like, you're not gonna have your home, you're not gonna have a car, you're gonna have to share a toothbrush, you're not gonna have anything that you need to survive. And that's actually a description of capitalism, because even if you buy a house in capitalism, you have to pay, for most people, unless you're very rich, you have to pay a 30-year mortgage, which is basically paying rent to the bank instead of paying rent to your landlord. And if you miss your mortgage payments, what's gonna happen? The bank is gonna foreclose upon your house and take your home. That's capitalism. Like, people every year are losing their homes, even that they supposedly own, under capitalism. For me, socialism means that everybody has a right to own their home, for example. No one can take that away from you. And when we talk about creating public property in socialism, which is talked about a lot, that's not about taking away your home or your toothbrush or the things that are your personal belongings. It's about looking at the wealth in our society, and instead of it belonging to a very small group of people, it's collectively owned. So Amazon, for example, is this amazing apparatus that has warehouses and distribution networks all across the country, and that apparatus is built by working people. The workers at Amazon who work in the factories, who make the deliveries, it's not built by Jeff Bezos, the guy who owns it, but he's the one who gains all the wealth from what's created by Amazon. Why is that logical? I don't think it is logical. That wealth should be the property of all of our society. And then Amazon, instead of being used to make Jeff Bezos richer, what if we used that amazing distribution resource to make sure that people can get access to their medicines on a single day basis? Like, if you need an urgent medicine, no matter where you live in the country, it can be delivered to you, because that infrastructure already exists, but it's being used in the wrong way. It's being used to make Jeff Bezos richer. So I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions. It's not about taking away your personal belongings. It's about making sure that the wealth of society is in the hands of the people instead of in the hands of this tiny group of billionaires.
Word. Who's someone that like inspires you, like dead or alive?
That's a great question. I have a lot of inspirations. I think I'm trying to think of who I want to say with this.
Take your time.
I'm gonna go with, I could go with a lot of people here, so I feel bad like leaving people out, but I'm gonna say someone who inspires me is Martin Luther King Jr. And he had a connection to Boston. He went to Boston University. He lived in a brownstone in the South End down on Mass Ave. That's still here. And a lot of people see Martin Luther King in a very kind of whitewashed way because of how he's taught in school. Like, basically, he marched once on Washington, and then racism was ended, and everything was bad. That's kind of how you learn about MLK in school. But he was a very profound thinker and profound leader, and he was involved in many important struggles in our society. And he was learning as he was growing as an organizer. And by the time that he got assassinated in 1968, he was really identifying the connection between the fight against racism and the fight against poverty. And he was organizing something called the Poor People's Campaign. And he said that we need to overcome the three evils in American society, which is racism, materialism, and militarism. And basically materialism meaning we value material things over people's needs. And I think that's a history that we need to uncover and claim the legacy of. He actually said capitalism has outlived its usefulness. And that's a quote that you never learn about MLK saying in school. because if we learned that this person we were taught to idolize viewed capitalism as an outdated system and saw that we need to stop funding war and instead invest in people's needs, a lot of people will be looking at the system today and saying we need to drastically change it. So I wanted to shout him out because I think he's somebody that everybody knows, but I think his legacy is often misrepresented in the mainstream, and he's a connection to Massachusetts as well. So I wanted to give him a shout out.
Word, that's dope. And I think he is like kind of not really praised up like how he should be for a lot of different things. So I do understand where you're coming from, for sure. What's like some qualities that you think like you resonate with him?
I think for one is he had an optimism that society could change, and that's reflected in many of his speeches. I mean, like one of his most frequently referenced speeches is the "I Have a Dream" speech. And he has a lot of other speeches that people should look at and listen to, but a lot of what he was saying to people was this belief that society can change and that we can be part of changing society. So that's one of the kind of characteristics or principles that I value. And again, I think it's the belief in people, right? Like he's very famous for being involved in organizing the Montgomery bus boycott in 1955, which desegregated the buses in Montgomery. And it wasn't just MLK going and again giving some cool speeches in Montgomery. He helped organize with many other people in Montgomery to boycott the buses for a year, where people were walking or carpooling because they were tired of living in disrespectful conditions that said, well, if a white person gets on the bus, you have to get up, give your seat up, and move to the back of the bus. People said, we would rather walk or find other means of transportation than to live with that disrespect. And I respect that MLK was part of building a collective movement. And I think it's something that we should clarify today, that yes, he was a great leader, but he couldn't have achieved anything on his own. And investing in developing other leaders, investing in building a powerful movement, that's as much a part of his legacy as the great speeches that he gave as an individual. And so I respect those things about him too.
Word. What's something that really made an impact on your life, like to get into social justice?
That's a good question. I mean, I talked about police brutality earlier, so maybe I'll talk about that again. But I'll say one thing is the healthcare system in this country. I people in my family that have chronic health issues that don't have any type of cure, and seeing the way that if you have a chronic health condition, you have to constantly worry about what could potentially happen if you lose your job or if you're not able to work anymore, because the cost of healthcare is so unaffordable, and in the society you need a job to survive, even if you don't have the capacity to work because of your health. And seeing the ways that people in my family have had to worry about that, have had to deal with the expensive costs of healthcare, and just the anxiety that comes around like worrying about what's going to happen if we have a downturn with the health and someone's not able to work anymore, or they have a really expensive hospital bill or whatever else. That's not something that people should have to worry about, because again, we spend $2 trillion on healthcare of our own tax dollars every year to fund private health insurance companies so they can get richer, and meanwhile we had to worry about going to debt for healthcare. And the fact that medical debt is such a big cause of people going bankrupt in our society, that had a big impact on me, just seeing, again, we have the resources to actually solve this issue and make it something that people don't have to worry about. But instead, because our healthcare system is organized around profit instead of care, it's something that my family and many other families have to stress about.
How does that cause you like anxiety, like knowing like the healthcare system it's at its point right now?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's it's kind of like what we were talking about earlier, worrying about the worst case scenario. And I think that's something a lot of people can relate to, whether it's around healthcare or just around surviving every day. There's so many millions of families in this country that are living paycheck to paycheck and are one emergency away from a very bad economic situation, whether that emergency is your car breaking down or losing a job or somebody having to go to the hospital or whatever else it is. And there's a lot of scientific studies that show there's a relationship between high stress levels and negative health outcomes, meaning if you're constantly stressed about your day-to-day life, then that has a negative impact not just on your mental health but on your physical health, and then that can actually create more issues for you down the line. So I think it's just a real shame that, again, in the richest country in the world, everybody is going to have to deal with some level of anxiety in life. Like there's things that are unpredictable, but why should the things that you need to survive be a cause of your anxiety? I think that's completely unjust, especially in a society like the United States that's so rich.
Okay. How would you say like anxiety correlates to cultural trauma currently going on in society today?
Could you say a little bit more about that question?
Like I would say, like, how would you say like anxiety correlates to like cultural trauma currently going on?
In terms of like people, like what you were saying earlier, in terms of like immigrant families, or
it can be like in general, like any type of individual.
Can you just rephrase the question a little bit?
Okay, I got you.
I understand it. Yeah.
Okay, so like how does anxiety impact the African community culture that's going on in America, or anyone that's black or brown?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a good question. I think part of the history of this country, and I think also it's relevant to many other places in the African diaspora, is that struggle is a day-to-day component of life. Like it's understood that, especially here in the United States, you live in a society where it's very unequal. That, I mean, here in Boston, for example, if you look at the wealth disparities between black families and white families, we have a long way to go to overcome like the legacy of racism in this country and the ongoing practices of racism in this country. And at the same time, we have to live our lives, So I think there's kind of a culture that can be created in a lot of our families that's like, we don't have time to be worrying about the stresses of life, to be dealing with this anxiety. Like we just got to work, we got to do what we got to do to survive. And I think that makes it hard for a lot of people, I know, like black households and many other households, to talk about that concept of anxiety and mental health. And I think that's relevant to really all people, working people, all different backgrounds, that if you need to struggle to survive, sometimes worrying about mental health can be treated as like a luxury that we don't have. And I think I respect what you're doing in terms of raising the awareness that it's something that all of us do have to deal with, especially in a society like ours where there's so much exploitation, so much inequality, so much violence that we see every day. And I think that one of the things that I really try to contribute to this discussion is these feelings that any individual may have around anxiety or any other aspect of mental health. You're not alone in that, and it's not your fault either. But we live in a society that creates a lot of those problems that makes us feel anxious. And I think there's a lot of things that people can do on their own to take care of themselves and have healthy habits, good practices, whatever. But to me, one of the important things is also, if you feel unhappy with the way that our society is, you don't just have to deal with it. You can be part of something bigger than yourself to try to change it in your community or in the country as a whole more broadly.
Word. And how do you plan on bringing out liberation in what you do?
Well, it's a big theme of everything that goes through my politics. That's why we're the PSL, the Party for Socialism and Liberation, and we understand that in the history of this country, you can't understand it without understanding racism. You can't understand the history of this country without understanding the oppression of women, of LGBTQ people, of immigrants. Like that's all baked in.